Let me tell you something about the moment everything changed. Not the war, not the treaties, not the 10,000 hours of negotiation tables and holographic maps and ambassadors talking past each other in 100 different languages that none of them could actually pronounce right. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about one moment, one room, one human. And a punch that nobody in that hall will ever forget as long as they live. I was there. I was standing maybe 40 feet back, off to the left side of the reception floor, pressed against a column made of something that looked like black obsidian, but wasn't. It was grown, not carved, some kind of crystallized mineral compound that the Vethar pulled out of their planet's crust over 700 years ago. The ceiling was so high above us, it had its own weather system. I'm not being dramatic. There was a thin layer of atmospheric condensation floating near the top like an indoor cloud, and light filtered through it in long pale ribbons that moved when the ventilation system cycled. The hall was called the Arith Solin, the Great Greeting Chamber, first thing every dignitary saw when they arrived at Vethar Prime. And standing in the middle of it, in front of the Queen, in front of 500 diplomatic observers from 42 species, was Warlord Groth Vel San. He was the size of a ground vehicle. I don't mean that loosely. I mean if you'd parked a mid-sized military transport next to him and told someone to guess which one was the Warlord, they might have hesitated. His species, the Dorak, were engineered somewhere deep in their evolutionary history to be exactly what they looked like. Weapons with egos. 7 feet of layered muscle and reinforced bone, skin like weathered slate, 4 arms arranged in 2 offset pairs, a jaw structure that could crack hull plating, and eyes that had this amber gold light in them that pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat but slower. He was magnificent, and he was terrifying, and he knew it. And next to him, standing with both hands clasped behind his back, wearing a standard-issue human diplomatic uniform, dark charcoal gray, minimal metals, the small silver earth-crest pin on his left lapel, was Corporal Dane Mercer. Dane was 5'11", medium build. Brown hair cut close on the sides, slightly longer on top in that way that looked like he either had a barber who cared or he'd done it himself in a ship bathroom. He had a jaw that could have been considered strong on a good day, and eyes that were. I looked this up later in the file hazel, though from where I was standing they just looked dark. He was human, completely unremarkably unmodified human. And Warlord Groth Vel San had decided, in front of everyone, to make him a point. Here's the thing you need to understand about the Dorak before I tell you what happened. They don't have a concept of diplomacy the way most species do. Or rather, they have it, but they wear it the way a blade wears a scabbard. It's there to be kept in until it isn't. Every interaction for a Dorak, even a formal one, even one in the presence of a ruling monarch, is measured against a scale of dominance. They are not trying to be offensive. They genuinely do not understand that other species experience their behavior as threatening, because in Dorak culture, everything is a negotiation about power, and the only negotiations that mean anything are the ones where both sides understand clearly who stands where. That's why what Groth did wasn't, technically, a violation of galactic diplomatic protocol. There's a loophole, has been for decades, where a Dorak representative can issue a formal challenge of standing to any member of a diplomatic party if they believe that party's position at the table is inflated beyond what their physical capability merits. It's an old law. It dates back to before the Dorak joined the Galactic Compact. The Council has been arguing about closing it for 80 years, and every time they get close, the Dorak delegation walks out, and nobody wants to run the math on what a Dorak walkout actually costs. So the loophole stays. And Groth used it. He'd been standing on the left side of the Queen's reception line for most of the morning, holding a silence that felt like a held breath. The Queen, Sovrath III Vethar, A woman of approximately 420 years whose presence made the air around her feel formal, was receiving the delegations in order. The humans were third from last. Not an insult, just the schedule. When the human delegation reached the floor, there were 6 of them. Ambassador Reyes at the front, a career diplomat who'd been negotiating galactic treaties since before most of the junior staff were born. Behind her, 2 cultural attachés, a trade specialist, a xenoprotocol officer, and Corporal Dane Mercer, who was officially there as a security escort. Ceremonial. The kind of role that's meant to stand quietly and look composed and not have anything actually happen to it. The ambassador made the approach. Did the formal greeting correctly. The Vethar greeting is a 3-part gesture involving the hands and a specific angle of the chin, and most humans butcher it because the chin angle is counterintuitive, but Reyes had been practicing for weeks, and she got it exactly right. The Queen received it. There were pleasantries exchanged in the common trade language, a few formal phrases in Vethar as a courtesy. And then Groth spoke. He stepped forward from his position, not toward the Queen, not toward the ambassador, toward Dane. He spoke in Doric first, which translated with about a half-second delay through the room's interpretation system. The translation that came out was careful and formal, the way official translation always is, but even careful and formal, the words landed like stones into still water. I issue challenge of standing against the armed representative of the human delegation. By the law of the compact, this challenge is my right. Their military representative stands before our Queen in the posture of a warrior, and I do not recognize that posture as earned. 500 people went completely, absolutely silent. I remember the silence more than almost anything else. The hall had this ambient hum from the ventilation and the lighting systems and just the collective presence of that many bodies, and when Groth spoke, all of that seemed to stop, like the building itself was listening. Ambassador Reyes went very still. I could see the back of her neck from where I stood, and I watched the muscles there tighten. The xenoprotocol officer, a young Terran woman named Foss, looked at Reyes. Reyes did not look back. One of the cultural attachés made a very small, controlled movement with his hand. It was the gesture that meant I don't know what to do in half a dozen human body language dialects, just compressed down to the smallest possible version of itself. The Queen's face, I could see it from my angle, did not change. She watched. The Vethar are very old as a civilization, and Sovrath III had been ruling for over 200 years, and in that time she had seen things that would collapse lesser beings. She watched Groth with an expression that was not quite neutrality and not quite judgment, something in between, like a reader who's reached a passage they've read before but want to see how it resolves this time. Groth took another step toward Dane. The 4 arms shifted, the top pair spread slightly, which in Doric body language is somewhere between a display and an invitation. The bottom pair stayed low, relaxed. He was being performative. He wasn't afraid of anything in that room. He dropped into the trade language, the language everyone could understand without delay, without the half-second translation lag. "Little human," he said, and the room caught its breath again, "your compact sends you here dressed as if war is your nature, but we all know what humanity is, soft, new. You've been among the stars for, what, 300 years? The Doric have been warriors for 6,000. You stand in the presence of a queen with a weapon at your hip you couldn't use if your life required it. And perhaps more to the point." He stopped. He tilted his head, that amber light in his eyes pulsing. He was building to something. He knew he was building to something. Everyone in the hall knew. Your life is about to require it. Now, here is what I want to be precise about, because I have given this testimony 3 times to 3 different review boards, and every single time I am asked about this moment, and every single time I try to be exactly accurate. Corporal Dane Mercer did not panic. He did not step back. He did not look at Ambassador Reyes for guidance. He did not make any of the involuntary body language signals that humans produce when they're frightened, the microexpressions, the shoulder tension, the hand drift toward a sidearm. He was carrying his sidearm on his right hip, standard ceremonial holster with the safety flap secured, and his hand never went anywhere near it. What he did was he breathed. I saw it. One slow breath in through the nose, chest expanding slightly, chin staying level. He was looking at Groth with the particular kind of attention that is not aggression and is not submission. It is something a lot harder to produce than either of those, which is assessment. He was looking at Groth the way you look at a problem you have seen before and are calculating the most efficient solution to. Groth read this wrong. Of course he did. In Doric culture, that kind of stillness in the face of a dominant display means capitulation. It means the other party has recognized the hierarchy and is waiting to be told what the hierarchy requires of them. Groth had done this dance 100 times. He knew all the steps. He had never once had a partner who didn't eventually follow the script. He took the last step forward. He was now close enough that the size differential was visually overwhelming. Standing that near to a Doric, with their particular combination of height and mass, produces something in the nervous system that is very hard to consciously override. It is not fear exactly. It is the body having an opinion that overrides the mind. Every species that has recorded first contact with Doric mentions this. It's documented. It's involuntary. Groth reached out with his upper left arm, slowly, almost lazily, the way you reach for something you're confident isn't going anywhere, and placed his hand on Dane's right shoulder. In the Doric challenge of standing, this is the formal initiation, physical contact. It signals that the challenge has been accepted by default and the physical demonstration can begin. The hand was enormous. It covered most of Dane's shoulder and part of his upper arm. The fingers the Doric have 4 per hand, but they're wide, heavy things curled slightly inward, not gripping yet, just there, a statement of presence. The room had not breathed in approximately 12 seconds. I remember the light in the hall, those long pale ribbons filtering down from the cloud layer near the ceiling, the way the floor reflected them. The Arith Solon's floor is polished to a mirror quality, and in it I could see the bottom half of everyone standing nearby, including Dane's shoes, which were regulation black and extremely well maintained. I remember the sound of Groth's breathing, which was slightly audible across a shocking distance. I remember Ambassador Ray's finally turning her head a fraction of a degree toward the Queen, as if looking for some signal that the situation was going to be resolved from the outside. And I remember the exact moment, the precise, identifiable instant when Dane Mercer made his decision. His eyes changed. Not expression, not the visible muscle arrangement that we call expression. Underneath that, the focus shifted by a fraction, the way a camera adjusts, and in the half-second it took for that adjustment to happen, I swear to you, the temperature in the room felt different. He reached up with his left hand. He placed it on top of Groth's hand, the enormous Doric hand that was resting on his shoulder. He looked up at Groth. The height difference made this a significant angle. He held it for 3 seconds. And then Dane Mercer removed the Warlord's hand from his shoulder. Not roughly, not theatrically. He just lifted it, moved it, set it aside. The way you move a heavy object that is in the place where you need to be. Groth froze. Okay, so I need to explain something, because I know what you're imagining right now, and what actually happened is both more mundane and more extraordinary than the version your brain is probably constructing. Groth froze because nobody had ever done that before. Not to him, specifically, and not in the collective memory of any Doric who had ever recorded performing the challenge of standing in a formal setting. The hand on shoulder is the end of that part of the sequence. After that, the challenged party has 3 options: withdraw from the floor, accept subservient status, or engage physically. There is no option that involves calmly and quietly removing the initiating hand like it's a coat someone accidentally left on your chair. There is no protocol for that. Groth had no script. For approximately 2 seconds I counted, because I was counting everything in that room. The most terrifying warrior species in the known galaxy stood completely still and had absolutely no idea what to do. And in those 2 seconds, Dane looked back at Ambassador Reyes. He said, in perfectly conversational English, which the room's translation system picked up and rendered in the common trade tongue for everyone present. "Ambassador, I'm going to need a moment." Reyes stared at him. He turned back to Groth. And then he spoke in trade language, clearly, without rushing, his voice at a volume that was loud enough for the nearest 100 or so people to hear but not pitched to perform for the room. Like he was having a conversation, not making a speech. "Warlord," he said, "I know what this is. I know the law. You have the right to issue the challenge, and I'm not going to disrespect that or disrespect you by pretending I don't understand what you're doing." He paused, one beat. "But I want you to think about what you actually know about humans before you finish this." Groth found his voice. It came out lower than before, rougher, the amber light in his eyes flickering faster. "What I know about humans." "You know we've been in space 300 years, Dane said. He said it the same way he'd said everything else. No heat, no performance, like he was correcting a small factual error in a conversation about something unimportant. "You know we're soft, new, unproven. That's the story. That's what's in the galactic file on us." He tilted his head slightly. "Can I tell you what's not in the file? I want to stop here and tell you something I learned about Dane Mercer afterward, in the weeks when people were trying to figure out exactly what had happened and why. He was from a place called Keswick, small town in the northern part of England on Earth, in a region famous for mountains and rain and people who apparently say very little and mean a great deal of it. He'd grown up in a house near a lake, not a Vetharscale lake, nothing dramatic, just a cold gray body of water surrounded by hills that were green for about 4 months a year and the color of old iron for the rest. His father had been a farmer. His mother had taught mathematics at the regional school. He had enlisted at 19. Not because of any particular patriotic feeling, he'd apparently said in one of the early psych evaluations, though he said it without any of the self-consciousness that usually accompanies that admission, but because he was good at it. The physical part, the discipline part, the part where things needed to happen in a specific order and you needed to be the person who made sure they happened. He was good at that. He had served 7 years before the Galactic Compact expanded its diplomatic protection agreements to include human military personnel as formal escort representatives. When that happened, the Earth Defense Force needed people who could pass the Cultural Competency Certification, a brutal 6-month course that about a third of the people who started it dropped out of, and Dane passed it. Not because he was brilliant. He'd say that himself. He'd say he was thorough. He'd spent the 6 months learning not just the protocols but the reasoning behind the protocols, the cultural history that had produced each rule, the things that would make a given species feel respected or feel insulted, and more importantly, the things that were true about every species that nobody had yet figured out how to put in a manual. The thing he'd figured out about the Dvorak, specifically, was this. They respected what survived. Not power exactly, not size. Not even violence, though violence was the primary lens through which they evaluated everything. What Dvorak actually responded to, at the deepest cultural level, was durability. The thing that had been tested and hadn't broken. The thing that stood after everything tried to knock it down. Their gods were not conquerors. Their gods were the ones who survived the conquering. Dane had figured this out 6 weeks into his cultural competency training, from a footnote in a Dvorak cultural analysis paper that was 40 years old, and had apparently never been incorporated into the standard diplomatic briefings, because it contradicted the more comfortable narrative that the Dorak were simply aggressive and needed to be managed as such. He'd built everything he did in that hall on that footnote. Back to the room. "What's not in the file," Dane said to Groth, "is this." He reached into his uniform jacket. The room, already tense, made a collective sound that wasn't quite a gasp, like 500 people simultaneously reconsidered their next breath. But he moved slowly, deliberately, making it visually clear the movement was controlled. What he pulled out was not a weapon. It was a small card, military issue, the size and thickness of a business card but matte dark gray with a printed code on it. He held it up toward Groth, then turned it so the room could see, and then, because Dane was nothing if not thorough, he said clearly what it was. "This is a confirmed engagement record. 73 separate documented combat events, 11 species, 14 planetary environments ranging from -40 to +60 Celsius, 4 zero-gravity engagements." He paused. "I'm 29 years old." Groth looked at the card. He looked at Dane. The amber light was very still now. "That record," Dane continued, "is not unusual for a human military professional at my age. What is unusual, what doesn't make it into the galactic file, is this." He put the card back in his pocket. "Humans evolved on a planet that was, by galactic biological standards, actively trying to kill us. Not metaphorically. Every ecosystem on Earth, every food chain, every weather pattern, every disease vector, all of it pushed against us. We are the only known species that evolved to full sapience while simultaneously being prey animals. Not at the bottom of the food chain, not at the top, somewhere in the middle, surrounded by things that were larger and faster and better armed. We survived anyway, and then we left that planet and went looking for more things to survive." He let that sit. "I am not here to prove anything to you, Warlord," he said. "I am here to stand next to my ambassador and do my job, which is to represent my people with appropriate dignity. That includes not backing down from something I haven't done anything to deserve." Groth was very quiet. "Then you would not survive contact with me in a physical engagement. You know this." "Probably not," Dane agreed. "But you'd know I'd been there." What happened next, and this is the part that made it into every record, every report, every unofficial retelling that spread through galactic diplomatic circles over the next 6 months, happened very fast, and I am going to try to describe it accurately. Groth made a decision. I could see it happen. The Doraks show their decisions physically. There's a shift in the shoulder structure, in how the forearms position relative to the body, and what Groth's body showed was the decision to test the claim. He moved. Doraks strike fast for their size. That's documented. It's also something that every person who knows it intellectually is completely unprepared for the first time they see it in person. The upper right arm came around in a wide, sweeping, open-palmed movement, not a killing blow, not even a serious one by Dorak standards. A calibration, a check to see if the thing across from you can take what's coming. Dane moved. I almost missed it. Later, when I described it to the review board, one of the Vethar observers, who have a different visual processing system than humans, and apparently caught it more clearly than I did, described it as the human went sideways, which is more or less accurate. He dropped his right shoulder and rotated left, letting the sweep go past him, and the sound of the movement was a low rush of displaced air where Dane's head had been approximately half a second earlier. Groth recalibrated. He brought the arm back in the return arc faster, tighter, and this time Dane didn't go sideways. He went under, down and forward inside the arc, inside Groth's reach, which for a Dorak is not supposed to be a survivable position, because inside the reach is where the secondary arms work, and the secondary arms are shorter and faster and hit harder pound for pound than the long sweeping primary arms. The secondary arms came in. What Dane did to the secondary arms, I have watched the security recording 17 times, and I still cannot fully parse it. The Xenoprotocol officer who analyzed the recording for the board described it as a combination of 2 or 3 distinct human unarmed combat disciplines occurring in approximately 0.8 of a second. The short version is, the secondary arms did not reach him, and he was inside Groth's guard. Standing inside a Dorek's guard, less than 2 feet from the body, in the space that the long arms can't effectively cover, facing upward at a chest that's at approximately the height of your eye level. This is not a tactically favorable position. Any Dorek combatant trained to mid-level will immediately go to grapple. The grip strength alone can end the engagement, and Groth was not mid-level. Groth was among the most decorated combat commanders in Dorak history. He went to grapple. Dane hit him first. This is the part I need to be careful about, because hit is not quite the right word. The Dorak body is reinforced. The skeletal structure is denser than most comparable species. The musculature is layered in a way that distributes impact force, and their nervous system is wired to compartmentalize pain signals during active combat. You cannot hurt a Dorak the way you would hurt something of comparable size that was built differently. What Dane did was not an attempt to hurt Groth. It was an attempt to communicate. He drove his right fist, not swinging, not wide, a short compact straight drive from the elbow into the left side of Groth's chest, right into the center of the primary cardiac region, with everything he had. The sound it made was very loud. It was not the sound of something breaking. It was the sound of significant force being delivered to a significant body, and the result in acoustic terms was somewhere between a crack and a boom, and the entire hall heard it, and the entire hall felt it through the floor, because the impact sent a vibration through Groth's body that translated down through his legs into the ground. Groth did not fall. I want to be very clear about this. He did not fall. What he did was stagger. 1 step back, left foot sliding on that perfect mirror-polished floor. The 4 arms came out to his sides for balance, that involuntary motion that every species with bilateral or quadrilateral symmetry makes when the center of gravity is challenged. His chin came down and then came back up. The amber light in his eyes went wide and very bright, and then slowly, dimmed back to its normal pulse. He stood there. He looked at Dane. Dane stood where he was, inside the guard, right hand still loosely fisted at his side, breathing like someone who had just done something effortful but not something that had frightened him. There was a small cut on his left forearm where one of the secondary arm deflections had grazed him. He hadn't avoided all of it. Nobody could have. But the graze was superficial and he didn't look at it. He was looking at Groth. The room had not moved. 500 beings of 42 species, in the great greeting chamber of Vethar Prime, completely motionless. The cloud layer near the ceiling had drifted a few feet, in whatever direction the ventilation was moving it. The light ribbons swayed gently. Nobody made a sound for what felt like a very long time. Then Queen Sovrath III, from her position at the head of the reception floor, said something in Vethar that the translation system rendered as, "Well, I want to talk about what happened to the room after that, because I think it's the part that mattered most in the long run, and it's the part that gets left out of the formal records because formal records are about facts, and what happened to the room was about something that facts can't quite capture." The sound came back first. Not voices, not immediately, but the ambient hum of the building, the ventilation and the lighting and the collective presence of all those bodies. It returned in a wave from somewhere behind me and moved through the hall like a tide coming back in after an unexpected retreat. Then the voices, low at first, not the formal trade language, not diplomatic register, the private murmur of people who have all just witnessed the same thing and are turning to whoever's nearest to them to confirm that they also saw it. The Vethar delegates closest to me said something to each other that I didn't catch. The Korathi cultural liaison a few feet to my right made a sound that in their species communication register signals something like, well, that's changed things. A group of Shan observers near the back of the hall. The Shan are enormous, very calm, very difficult to read, were completely still, but the coloring in their cranial membranes had shifted from their normal pale blue to a deep, vivid teal, which in Shan physiology is the involuntary response to experiencing something that registers as significant. They didn't choose to be impressed. Their biology did it for them. Groth had not moved. He was still standing where the stagger had taken him, that one step back, and he was still looking at Dane, and the expression on his face, Doric facial musculature, is not built for the range of expression most other species use, but the broad shapes of it translate, was one I did not have a reference for. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the particular kind of fierce joy that Doric display when they're in a fight they're enjoying. It wasn't shame. It was something else, something I couldn't name at the time, and came back to later after I'd spent a month reading everything available about Doric cultural psychology, and found it finally in a paper written by a Doric scholar, which is a rare thing, a Doric scholar. They are not a species known for academic output, who described an emotion in their language that translates roughly into something like the recognition of a thing that has the right to be. Groth was looking at Dane, the way you look at something you have just realized deserves to exist. He reached up slowly, deliberately. His upper right arm, the same arm that had thrown the first strike, moved toward Dane, and the room made that almost gasp sound again. But Groth stopped the arm short and turned the fist over, exposing the inner wrist, which in Doric physical language is the gesture of acknowledgement. Not submission, not apology, something more specific. I see you as real. Dane looked at the wrist for a moment. Then he mirrored it. He raised his own right arm, turned his wrist out, inner surface visible. The acknowledgement exchange. It was the most precise piece of cross-species cultural translation I have ever witnessed in a diplomatic setting, performed by a 29-year-old corporal from a town in the north of England, who was bleeding slightly from a graze wound on his left forearm. Groth spoke, in Doric, which the system translated. You hit like a rock that has been falling for a long time. In Doric, this is a significant compliment. Dane said, I'll take that. I need to tell you about the Queen. Because throughout all of this, the challenge, the exchange, the fight that was and wasn't a fight, the acknowledgement, Sovrath III had been standing at her position and watching with the expression I described earlier, the one like a reader who'd been here before but wanted to see how it resolved. After the acknowledgement exchange, she stepped down from the raised reception platform. One step, which put her at floor level with everyone else, which the Vethar protocol officers in the room later described to me as something that had not happened in a formal reception in over 70 years. She walked across the floor toward Dane. This caused the protocol officers visible distress. They did not intervene, because you do not intervene with the Queen of Vethar Prime, but two of them made the Vethar gesture of acute professional anxiety, a very fast, very small movement of both thumbs. She stopped in front of Dane. She was tall for a Vethar, approximately 6'2", and she had the particular quality that very old and very powerful beings develop, where their physical presence seems to occupy more space than their body actually does. She had silver hair, not aged silver, the particular bright silver that Vethar develop in their 2nd century, and eyes that were a pale, pale gold, almost colorless, that caught light in a way human eyes don't. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, in perfectly clear trade language, with the precise accent of someone who has spoken it for centuries and has it down to the marrow. Corporal Mercer, are you injured? Dane glanced at his forearm, the graze. Minor abrasion, Your Majesty, nothing that warrants concern. She looked at the arm, then she looked at him. You knew he would strike, she said. It wasn't a question. It was the kind of statement that contains a question inside it, and Dane recognized it as such. I assessed it as likely, Your Majesty. And you prepared for it? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. The entire hall was quiet with her. You prepared for it, she repeated, and yet you stood your ground and you spoke to him first. You gave him the words before you gave him the demonstration. That was the intention, Dane said. The Queen tilted her head slightly, the way very old beings do when they are genuinely curious about something and don't bother to hide it. Why, she said. Dane thought about it. Not visibly, not the theatrical pause of someone performing consideration, just a single breath of actual thought, and then, because he's not a bad person, Your Majesty. He was doing what his culture tells him is right and good and honest. And if I just hit him first, I'd have proven his point, that humans are combative without context, aggressive without communication. I wanted him to hear something before he decided what I was, even if the hearing only lasted 12 seconds. The Queen looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then she said, Ambassador Reyes, your escort has done the galaxy a considerable service today. I hope you will convey that to your government. Reyes, who had not moved or spoken since approximately 5 minutes ago, said, I will, Your Majesty, with great pleasure. I should tell you what happened to Groth. This is the part most of the informal accounts get wrong, because the informal accounts were written by people who weren't there, and who wanted the story to be a certain shape. The shape they want is, the arrogant warlord is humiliated in public and slinks away. That's a satisfying shape. It's clean. That's not what happened. After the Queen stepped back to her platform, and the reception resumed, carefully, with a kind of determined normality that everyone maintained through sheer diplomatic professionalism, Groth crossed the floor toward the human delegation's waiting area on the right side of the hall. Toward Dane specifically. The protocol officers made those thumb movements again. Ambassador Reyes positioned herself half a step forward in a way that was both automatic and entirely unnecessary. Groth stopped in front of Dane and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in trade language, at a volume that was genuinely conversational, not performing for the room. Your form when you entered the guard. I have not seen that combination before. Muay Thai and BJJ, Dane said. Earth disciplines, old ones. They are effective. Against most things, Dane agreed. He didn't say it boastfully, he just agreed. Groth made a sound that the translation system did not attempt to render, which usually means it's too culturally specific for direct translation. His head moved in a way that looked like the Doric equivalent of a nod. I would know more about these disciplines. I'd be happy to share what I know. Groth looked at him. The human does not gloat. There's nothing to gloat about, Dane said. You're still standing, so am I. That seems like the right outcome. There was another of those untranslatable sounds. Your people, Groth said slowly, like someone working through a calculation they're genuinely engaged with, are stranger than I understood. I get that a lot, Dane said. The reception concluded 3 hours later. The formal negotiations that everyone had actually come to Vethar Prime for, the trade extension agreements, the Dorak corridor access proposals, the Vethar mediation initiatives, proceeded over the following 4 days and were, by all accounts, among the most productive diplomatic sessions the region had seen in the last 2 decades. Several people have told me that the Groth-Mercer exchange at the start set a tone for the entire negotiation. That there is something about watching a moment of genuine honesty, even a physically violent moment, that makes the subsequent conversations more real. Like the pretense had been taken out of the room at the start, and what was left was people who had all watched the same thing and knew, even if they didn't say it, what they'd witnessed. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a diplomat. I was there as a junior observer for a xenocultural documentation project, and the specific part of the project I was documenting was ceremonial reception protocols, and what I ended up with instead was this account. My supervisor, when I filed it, said it was the most valuable documentation I had or likely would ever produce. He wasn't wrong. What I keep coming back to, months later, is the punch. Not whether it was the right thing to do, not the tactical analysis or the cultural protocol or the formal inquiry that the Compact's Diplomatic Oversight Committee opened and then closed after finding no actionable violations. I keep coming back to the actual physical moment. The sound it made. The way Groth staggered. The way the room received it. Because here's the thing about that sound. It was the sound of a human being standing in an alien Queen's Hall in front of 500 observers from 42 species, doing something that his species had been doing for 200,000 years. Before the stars, before the cities, before language or writing or fire or farming. Standing in a situation that was trying to knock him down and not going down. There's no protocol for that. There's no compact law, no diplomatic training module, no galactic cultural briefing that covers it. It's older than any of those things. It's the thing that was true before any of those things existed and will still be true after they've been revised 100 more times. Humans survive. Not because we're the biggest, not because we're the fastest or the most ancient or the most armored, because somewhere deep in the wiring of what we are, there is something that looks at the thing in front of it, however large, however fast, however terrifying, and does the calculation and then decides, not today. And then it doesn't. That's the story. That's the whole story. One room, one human, 500 witnesses, one punch. And something changed. I don't know if I can tell you exactly what it was that changed. The formal report calls it a significant shift in galactic perception of human diplomatic and physical capacity. The unofficial summaries call it various things depending on who's writing them and what angle they prefer. What I'd call it, if anyone's asking, and the review board did ask, more than once, is this. The galaxy found out something it hadn't known before. Not that humans were powerful, not that we were dangerous or fierce or militarily capable. There are records that say all of those things, and nobody with access to those records was surprised by them. What the galaxy found out in that room on that day was that humans are coherent, that we are the same thing all the way through. That the person who stands calmly and speaks honestly and gives you the words first, and the person who drops their shoulder and moves inside your guard and drives a fist into your chest with complete commitment, it's the same person, the same calculation, the same thing. We don't have a war self and a peace self and a diplomat self and a soldier self. We have one self, and that self will try every door before it kicks one in, but it will kick one in. Groth understood that. By the end of that morning, looking at Dane across the floor of the Arith Solen, he understood it in the way that Dorek understands things, with his body, with his culture's deepest framework, with the part of him that had been built over 6,000 years to recognize what is real. And he recognized it. The last thing I'll tell you. On the fourth day of negotiations, the final evening, there was a formal dinner. Vethar hospitality is exceptional. The food was extraordinary. The setting was one of the most beautiful rooms I have ever been in. The evening was long and warm and generous. Near the end of it, I was standing near one of the windows, floor to ceiling, looking out over the city of Vethar Prime, which at night is lit in a way that makes it look like someone dropped a handful of stars down to ground level, and I heard voices nearby. Groth and Dane. They were standing a few feet away, not looking at each other, both looking at the window at the city. Groth had a Vethar hospitality drink in one of his 4 hands, a tall clear glass with something golden in it that the Dorek delegation had apparently taken to significantly. Dane had water. They were talking, I only caught part of it, and I've tried to reproduce it as accurately as I can. Groth said something about the Doric home world, about the terrain there, the specific quality of the light at certain times of year. He wasn't describing it for diplomatic purposes. He was just describing it, the way people describe home. Dane said something about Keswick, about the lake near his family's house, about how the water looks in winter. Groth said, "Your world has water that freezes." "Most of it," Dane said. "The parts I grew up near, definitely." Groth made the untranslatable sound again. "This is not comfortable." "No," Dane agreed, "but you get used to it, and then you miss it when it's gone." There was a pause. Then Groth said, "The Doric home world has no water that freezes. The warmth comes from below, from the core." He paused. "I have never experienced freezing." "You're not missing out," Dane said, and then, "Actually, that's a lie, you're missing out a little." Groth made a different sound, shorter, sharper. The translation system, when it caught it, rendered it as amusement, and I think for once the translation was exactly right. Two beings from opposite ends of the galactic catalog. One of the most feared warriors alive, and a corporal from a small town in the north of England. Standing at a window looking at a city that belonged to neither of them, talking about lakes and temperature and home. It was not a diplomatic moment. It wasn't meant to be recorded or analyzed or written into any report. It was just two people who had stood across from each other in a moment that could have gone very badly, finding out that on the other side of that moment, there was something that made sense. There is a word in Vethar. I learned it from the protocol officer, who later became something like a friend, that doesn't translate well into the trade language. It translates roughly as the peace that comes after something real has happened. Not manufactured peace. Not diplomatic peace. The kind that settles in after something genuine has been put into the room and received. That's what I saw at that window. And for all the records and reports and formal inquiries and xenocultural analysis papers that came out of that week on Vethar Prime, that window, those two figures, that conversation about freezing water and home, that's what I actually remember. That's the part that stayed.